Well, hello and welcome. We are at the A4M LongevityFest here in Las Vegas. I'm Tom Blue. I'm a founding partner of Ovation Lab, joined by my colleague, fellow partner, Chris D'Adamo, and one of the true innovators and kind of titans, I think, of the longevity field, Mr. Ryan Smith of TruDiagnostic, who we'll introduce in more detail in a moment. This is the Innovations and Clinical Implementation podcast series, and we are here to discuss a really, really interesting topic from what I think is one of the most fascinating companies in the entire space, which is TruDiagnostic. So welcome, gentlemen.
All right. Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, Ryan. It's a pleasure to have you. And so just for those who aren't aware, Ryan Smith is the founder and global head of research and development at TruDiagnostic, a CLIA-certified lab and health data company specializing in epigenetic methylation analysis and biological age testing. With a background in biochemistry and peptide compounding, he previously founded Tailor-Made Compounding before launching TruDiagnostic in 2020 to advance the measurement and modification of biological aging. Under his leadership, TruDiagnostic has built one of the world's largest private epigenetic databases and developed cutting-edge aging and health span algorithms now used in clinical trials, which we've been really honored to be a part of, and longevity-focused practices worldwide.
Wonderful. Well, to kick off in the opening talk, as you might recall, we did a giant 3-year running social listening study. Yes. And one of the things that we've been studying are the ways in which consumers measure their return on investment as they engage in longevity activities and services, products, what have you. And what's been fascinating is one ROI measure has been on a meteoric rise, 140% year-over-year growth in conversation in the last year alone, which is biological aging. And I attribute the great majority of that energy to TruDiagnostic and the work that you guys are doing. And not only is it the consumer that's aware of it, but even for research and product studies, the biological aging measure is fascinating. So maybe we could just kind of kick off. And how in the heck did you guys become such a far and away leader in that space?
Yeah, well, it's been fun, and I wish I could take a lot of the credit. We sort of hit the market at the right time for a lot of different reasons. For us, we were always looking for ways to validate longevity therapies, right? That's sort of how the company was started, sort of the ethos of the company, at least originally, because we don't have time for 20 to 40-year double-blind placebo-controlled trials in longevity. So you really need a surrogate if we want to impact longevity and health span in our lifetime, right? And so these epigenetic clocks really started in 2013 and have really matured to a place where they're clinically useful over just the last few years. And I think the science is just coming together at the right time. But I think in addition to that, we're seeing the space sort of wake up for one big reason, which is that generally aging is the biggest risk factor for every chronic disease and death. And so if we can treat this as a primary outcome, we're really affecting everything, right, from the top down. And as a result, that has massive impact to the economy, right? They were saying that essentially a 1-year reduction in biological age would be the equivalent of over $1 trillion in healthcare spend reduction because of the reduction of disease, these massive numbers. And so that's also attracted the longevity investment community, so this year there was over $9 billion in investment into longevity therapeutics and diagnostics. And then we also have the third piece, which I think is really important, which is big key opinion leaders finally taking the gauntlet. You have your Brian Johnson, who's finally bringing this to the national media. You have the Kardashians doing things like our testing on their program. And then you have all of these physician KOLs that are starting to sort of treat it as a primary outcome and sort of change how medicine is practiced. And so I think those three things have sort of allowed TruDiagnostic to ride that wave. And we've done so really with, I think, hopefully the best science, right? That's, I think, why we keep getting selected. The researchers are using us, in their clinical trials. We're doing these big biobank studies with the Harvards, Yales, and Stanfords of the world. And so having that diagnostic really empowers all of the rest of that community to do what we really want to do and treat aging as a primary outcome.
Nice. Mentioning the Brian Johnson for a moment, one of the things I thought was a brilliant metaphor was the Rejuvenation Olympics and longevity as a sport. And of course, TruDiagnostic is the scorekeeping mechanism there. Is that thing taking off?
It is, and actually there have now been like several offshoots,
Okay.
of it as well. So we're doing a big competition based in California with 2 actually in-person events over this next year, where we'll give people testing and we'll have them compete to see who can do it before the best reduction before the next event. So I think people are now starting to see this. I think that we're excited to use it as a competition, doing both the best reduction, so who can have the best improvement to their health, but also who can have just the lowest absolute value. And so just trying to get people, again, to look at this metric as a primary outcome. And I think people are certainly receptive.
That's such a cool way to get people enthusiastic about this. How many competitors do you have in the
So I'm trying to think. So we have pretty stringent criteria because we want this to be scientifically driven. So we require at least 3 tests. So I think now we're something along the lines of 15, 16,000, which is, and some people have done over testing with us now over 32 times, tracking. And so I think that you have the very competitive people who are trying to learn everything they can. And as they're learning, so are we. And I think that's super important as well.
Wow. Well, maybe we should shift for a moment because you brought up all the clinical research and talk. This is an area where we've had an opportunity to collaborate. And, Chris, you've been doing clinical studies for a really long time, and this is certainly a new way of going about it. I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts in terms of, just the utility of the TruDiagnostic testing as a research measure.
Sure. I can tell you we've done a couple of clinical trials together over the last couple of years. And what I'm really impressed by is how you continue to iterate and innovate and bring in new algorithms.
Yeah.
So you're using all the data to sort of learn more about this, develop new algorithms. Can you talk a little about that process? I mean, you're drawing on so much data that continues to give this credibility. Because, we write up a peer-reviewed publication, it's going to go through editorial review, peer review, it has to withstand a rigorous standard. So can you tell me how you've been able to achieve that? Because I look at it as one of my go-tos in any study with aging, and even just beyond aging at this point, too, with all the other stuff we'll talk about today. But how do you continue to innovate and incorporate all those other data sets in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that maybe for anyone listening, maybe just go back to first what epigenetics is and what we're actually measuring. Most people are familiar with genomics from the 23andMe's and the decade of development and commercialization that's happened in that area. And epigenetics, or DNA methylation, is sort of a little bit different in the fact that every single cell on your body has the same DNA. Your brain, your heart, your skin, but they behave very differently, and they do that by what genes are turned on and turned off. And so that's really what we're reading. And the good news about that is it's also changeable. So unlike genomics, you take a test once in a lifetime, you might see that you have risk, and that can be really scary for some people. But with epigenetics, that's a changeable platform. And so whenever we take a test or measurement, we're looking at generally over 1.3 million different locations in your genome, and that's a lot of data, right? But that data by itself is pretty hard to understand, right? It's a bunch of numbers between 0 and 1 that is impossible to interpret, and so we've really also been benefited by the AI revolution and being able to interpret these things. But we create algorithms, right, that can inform us about something. So how to read all of those numbers and data sets in a way that can make clinical sense, right? So sometimes we're predicting biological age. Other times we're predicting when you might die. Other times we're predicting your risk of cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's. And so those training of the algorithms is really our secret sauce at TruDiagnostic. And it's why our clinical trials have been probably our biggest growing area of business, because initially we were doing biological age measurements with just a few algorithms. And then today we've got over 2,500 algorithms that we'd run for every study. And those algorithms can inform us about biological age, certainly, but they can also inform us now about disease risk. They can inform us about other blood-based biomarkers, performance, they can perform, cognitive function diagnostics. And so that data set just keeps growing. And as a result, you can get a lot of information from a relatively low-cost clinical study. And so that's really what we're doing now is still doing a lot of longevity interventions. So supplements, procedures like hyperbaric oxygen, medications like the GLP-1s or, statins even. And so we're doing sort of everything across the spectrum. And our goal there is to build a big enough data set that we can get really personalized in medicine, right? So we can sort of say, this person is a high cardiovascular risk. We really want to treat this, or we want to recommend this therapy. And so that data set is super exciting for me because not only what we're learning about the interventions, but what it will grow into, which is really a platform that can do artificial intelligence-derived personalized medicine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it certainly has been a gift for our research work. That's for absolute sure. Let's talk a little bit more about the risk predictions and methylation risk scores, which have been an emerging and very exciting dimension of what you do.
Oh yeah, that's probably where I'm most excited. Aging is great, and I love aging. I think we're all motivated by aging for all the reasons we've already talked about. But the FDA still doesn't recognize aging as a primary outcome. We're hoping to change that with a couple grants that we've given by the government. But with that being said, disease right now is something that everyone's very familiar with, and so we also want to do what genomics did with polygenic risk scores, right? Looking at everyone's genomics and seeing if they're at increased or decreased risk. And we can do the same thing with the epigenetics. But again, the good news is it's changeable. So once you get your reading, we can implement therapies, we can implement lifestyle changes to change that risk. And so there are two parts that we would call what we're developing, these algorithms we're developing for disease. One are the methylation risk scores. These are the scores which are predicting your risk of developing a disease in 5 or 10 years. So that could be for Alzheimer's, it could be for type 2 diabetes, it could be for just about anything in the spectrum. And so in February, we'll probably be commercializing around 35 different methylation risk scores for things that previously even haven't had risk available, like COPD, for instance. Wow. COPD is the third most prevalent disease in the entire world. It's the #1 cause of healthcare spend, and we have no way to predict it. We ask surveys about smoking history, really crude measurements for where we should be today. And now we have molecular ways to actually read if we're going to be developing or risk of developing those diseases. So that's just one. And in this market, is actually well developed for some diseases like cancer. So Cologuard is sold for $44 billion. They do a diagnostic for one disease, which is colon cancer. You've got even Myriad Genomics, who does a breast cancer or polygenic risk score. They're doing over $350 million a year just in that one disease. And so we've got 35 of these that we hope to track and again integrate them into sort of a full healthcare picture.
Wow. Now, is that a product that practitioners can order today?
Yeah, so not today, but by February. So just in the next
February.
Month, probably by the time this airs,
wow,
we'll be able to have that available. And lucky enough to also announce that we just got our first 12 proprietary laboratory analysis codes, or PLA codes, from the American Medical Association for disease diagnostics. So we can do things like diagnosing Lyme disease or hepatocellular carcinoma. And we can do that, again, just that same methylation profile that's giving us our biological age and all of our omega-3 and NAD values. And so that data set is just so rich. And the more we learn how to read it, the more and better healthcare we can offer. And so there's plenty of different avenues we can take this, but I think disease is what people care about ultimately, right? That's why we're testing, that's why we're managing, and ultimately that's the importance we care about.
All from the same home kit.
Same home kit, yeah, just a fingerstick blood spot. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It sounds like Theranos. We always try and say the one big difference is we publish our algorithms so that everyone can validate them. So there are scientists out there we've never talked to that have our code that are now testing our algorithms, and we think that's super important to make sure it stays scientific.
And you publish your work. I mean, I'll brag for you. You have like near about 80 publications or so, or something like that, and that just shows the credibility, why we trust it as a research mentor.
Exactly, and you have to with some of this new technology, right? And, I can understand why people have skepticism when they come and see some of our claims. They look sometimes too good to be true. And I understand that, which is why you have to publish, and why we're also so interested in facilitating these interventional trials as well, right? To show that we can actually see change.
Right. Can you tell us how clinicians are going to be able to use those codes that you mentioned that you developed? Like how will they use at the point of clinical care?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, unfortunately, methylation risk scores are really hard to get insurance reimbursed. There's really, in the U.S. healthcare system, not a huge pipeline for preventative medicine, right, in that way. And so unfortunately right now, those scores are going to be so cash-based. But the diagnostic scores by which the American Medical Association and insurance sort of accept diagnoses, those will be able to be prescribed and insurance reimbursed. And so it'll be able to be sent to the patient's home. They'll get a diagnostic test for some things that are even hard to diagnose or might require a lot of invasive imaging or expensive imaging.
You mentioned Lyme and some others like that.
Yeah, exactly. Lyme is one that is a passion because it's, I think, in this community a little bit bigger than it is in the traditional. But we can actually even now separate chronic versus acute Lyme in that diagnostic with a 90% area under the curve, 98%, area under the curve. And so we can do that. We can do, again, if you have liver cirrhosis, you have to get an ultrasound generally every 6 months to make sure it doesn't proceed to hepatocellular carcinoma. Now we can sort of do that at home, right? To say, hey, are you proceeding to hepatocellular carcinoma just from a blood test? So we can save time for the patient, save costs of ultrasound and the ultrasound ultrasound technicians. And again, we do this in multiple different diseases all at once, which I think is a really exciting part.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about my experience having gone through the testing a number of times and you delivering the consult.
Yeah.
We've had this conversation before. What I have found was that it is an incredibly motivating consultation because of all the things you said. Number one, the measures are so meaningful. And not just meaningful in that they're real, but meaningful in that you care about these measures.
Yeah.
And they're modifiable.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things that I think practitioners would benefit from is to learn how to do the consult like you do. And now maybe that's a cheat sheet, that goes along with the report, but there's such a powerful way of delivering the results that you've obviously mastered over time, but clearly you can do that only a tiny fraction of the time. How do we enable clinicians to better deliver results that trigger huge behavior change like it does when you get it from you?
Yeah, this is a good question. It's one that we try and solve as a company all the time because, one of the best things about the testing is all of the information you get.
Yeah.
It's also one of the worst things about the testing because it gives you sort of this paralysis of action, right? What do I pay attention to? What do I care about? What do I do? And so I think that's one of the most, just sort of tie it all back to biological aging, right? I think that's why biological aging is such an exciting metric, is because, not only is it, disease will cause advanced biological aging, but advanced biological aging will cause advanced disease. And so if you can really focus on that metric, you can get it down. But I think that also, our epigenetic biomarker proxies, I think are, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about them in this. Our ability, so epigenetic biomarker proxies are using just the same DNA methylation data we're generating for everything else, but using it to predict the other types of things you'd get in a traditional blood draw. And so we're talking about your HbA1c, your CRP, your omega-3 fatty acid levels. And we can do that, but we can do it in spades, really, because we can do over 2,000 different measurements from that same drop. And so that's a lot of data, right? We can tell you about your amino acid profiles, your environmental toxins like your PFAS chemicals. And even in just a paper that happened last week, they showed that and this is separate from us entirely, in the University of Edinburgh Biobank, they showed that the epigenetics could predict 10 times more significant proteins for cardiovascular disease than the actual measurements of those proteins. And so what this allows us to do is to really, I think, our vision is to hopefully one day replace Quest and LabCorp, right? Replace the need for phlebotomy, the need to take plasma measurements and send it refrigerated, where we can do, typically even with Quest and LabCorp, you might be getting 50 measurements, you might be getting 100 if you're doing a lot, but we can do so much more and find unique biomarkers and things that are indicative of a certain treatment or a certain process. And so we really want to replace Quest and LabCorp entirely with these epigenetic biomarker proxies. But even in the methylation risk scores, they give us information. So for instance, we might have someone at increased Alzheimer's risk, but do we know if that's because of high inflammation or maybe resistance to insulin and high blood sugar? Is it a lipid problem that we have to worry about? And so these EBPs can not only give us, I would say, biomarkers that people are familiar with, but also information about which are the reasons we have these higher risk for these disease scores. And I think the combination of those is really exciting.
When do you imagine the first EBP panels being accessible?
So they're accessible now with our True Health report, and most people are using them again for things like personalized supplementation, right? Where they can look at what vitamins and minerals you might have nutrient deficiencies for, and then go out and make recommendations. And some people are replacing their labs entirely. There's only one weakness right now that I think prevents us from becoming the default lab for a lot of the providers, which is we don't do hormones, and we all know how important hormones are in aging. So we're trying to add that feature, and then I think we'll start to get a lot of adoption.
Yeah. Wow. Is there this is, 2000 is a tough question, but is there a biomarker or proxy, a single one that you're most excited about?
There are plenty, I think, but there's one that really excites me. There was a study in Nature Aging that found this new biomarker for cardiovascular disease. They said it was a causal biomarker, imidazole, I think, propionate. And so we've never heard of it before. I looked in our database. We have an EBP for it. I'd never seen it before. We ran it in Generation Scotland, which is 18,000 participants, to see, does it predict cardiovascular disease, like this other paper is saying. And we found it actually as the second highest ranked metabolite metabolite or protein or clinical value related to cardiovascular disease. It even beat BMI. And so, it's some of those things that we, don't even have the time to look at all of those different data sets. But as the literature starts growing, we start to see just the consistencies between our markers and the traditional markers. And I think that always gives us a lot of excitement. So that one's my favorite right now because it shows a proof of concept. But I'm sure there's going to be more important ones for more important diseases. I'm excited to develop some longevity-specific ones like Clotho and a few other proteins. Looking to do, right now, we're even looking at being able to do brain-derived tau and amyloid for Alzheimer's instead of just the plasma-derived tau and amyloid. And so there's so many different things I could go after. But I think that it'll be a really big step when we have it used as a reimbursed code in clinical medicine. And I think that's our next big goal.
All right. Well, Ryan Smith, TruDiagnostic, thank you so much. Any parting words for people to take a next step and dip a toe in the water here?
Yeah, if anyone wants to do the testing or even just learn about it, you can find us at TruDiagnostic. That's TruDiagnostic.com. And I'm sure we've got areas of research in your area of interest. So just take a look.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, guys. Perfect.
We help people live longer, healthier lives. By analyzing DNA methylation, we unlock AI-powered insights into how your body is aging and how you can take control of your diet, gut microbiome, longevity, aging, and more. TruDiagnostic is home to the largest DNA methylation lab in the world, leading the frontier of epigenetic research, pushing the limits of what's possible in health and aging. We collaborate with leading universities and power the world's largest epigenetic database. Fueled by relentless innovation, TruDiagnostic is redefining health with data. Take control, unlock your future, TruDiagnostic, the epigenetic company.